I think I'm gonna start with introducing myself, since most people probably in the community do already know me. So if there is someone that comes later, I won't have missed too much. I am Patricia Mussolino. I'm a doctor. I specialize in neurology and stroke at MGH, and I run a multidisciplinary clinic that has been seeing kids with pediatric and perinatal and prenatal strokes for many, many years now. And I do have also a research in a laboratory, and I really work on developing gene therapy for those diseases that are caused by genetic causes and alter the vessels and stroke. And today we're going to have a very special session. But before I go into introducing the speakers, I do want to ask everybody that is joining here in our webinar to rename yourself. You can do that in your little screen. There are 3 dots on the right corner, right upper corner, and if you click on that, you can say rename. And what we would like to know is, from where are you from, if it's a state in the US or a country, if you're not in the United States, and how old, if you're the patient or the kid that you care for that has had a brain injury and stroke. And I'm saying this because we also are reaching a community of parents and families that are helping and supporting kids developing after brain injury that might not necessarily be a stroke. We welcome everybody, and the disclosure is that you have to take into account what your professionals are saying, because not everything that we will be talking about necessarily will apply to every single kid. So it's important that we are trying to put a resource, which is a guidance and mostly an instruction for you to develop your own understanding and to be able to seek the resources locally that could help your kid thrive, or yourself, in the case that you are the stroke thriver. And you notice that we call stroke thrivers and not survivors, because we think they're way more than survivors. So with that, we will ask that if you have questions, you put them in the chat, and at the end of the presentations, there will be an open forum, and I'm gonna moderate with Mara the questions that are coming up so I can place them to the speakers. And if you're for it, we ask you to turn on the video and open your microphone and mute and ask the question directly, and I will call you on your name for that. With that is kind of the organizational part. These talks and webinars have been now going on for since October last year, and this is the follow-up of our in-person stroke workshops that we used to host at MGH since 2019. And you can find these videos in the YouTube channel that we created. And there's a lot of resources that are becoming more and more available. We also invite everybody to do suggestions on a post-event survey of what would you like to hear experts and families talk about. So we open this forum to other people and to other places in the world. So with that, I think I'm gonna go ahead and start introducing our speakers, and I'll tell you a little bit of how I get to be here on these webinars, and a lot of it has to do with Marty and Mara. They are accomplices in crime since the very early stages of this educational series that we've been developing. And I'm going to introduce Marty Wilkinson. Marty is a Feldenkrais and an Advaniel method practitioner who has a trajectory that started with early education as a teacher, his interest in development, and how the movement and the embodiment of that learning experience has driven him into becoming basically a full-time therapist for kids, not only with different developmental difficulties, but also he has a special heavy emphasis for kids with brain injury. And Maddie started working with us, connected through another parent in our clinic, and we learned a little bit of what the work that he was doing, and we have seen how impactful it has become. He has recently been in the news too. You guys can read more about it, for a very difficult, devastating disease that is now being treated with experimental gene therapy. and he's been treating these patients as well. And our second speaker, oh, by the way, and Marty is also the father of 2 kids and the husband of a wife who's also a practitioner. And we also have had the luxury of seeing the journey of his children as part of how we are trying to develop these resources to understand development, neurotypical, and what brain injury does, and how we can intersect to improve that potential of learning and experience. Our second speaker is going to be Mara. And Mara Yale, you probably all guys know her. She's the reason why we have these webinars, to be a plain advocate. Mara is a mother of 2 daughters. And her professional life started with a PhD in biophysics. She was for 2 decades in tech industry. And in 2018, she basically decided to take a pause and a turn in careers and applying principles of the Feldenkrais therapy that she learned for herself for an injury before becoming a mom. She started to apply them for parenting both children and also seeking to learn more, and became herself a Feldenkrais practitioner as well, and how to incorporate these concepts not just to the moment of therapy, but everywhere in the daily life. And Mara connected with me through another parent, and we started several years ago with an initial survey to see what was making people access or not resources, and what were their challenges, and how their kids are doing. That survey is still ongoing. And then we became very clear that we could do more and bring the experts to a conversation with the families, and that's what we are going to be doing. So today we have a very special session, because this is not necessarily a therapy that everybody is aware of. It's not a therapy that is available to everybody locally, because the practitioners are not that many. But the concepts of how to think and connect and see a kid in its development, I think, are incredibly important. They are vetted through a lot of neurodevelopmental research, and I think they're very useful. So what we're going to be doing is a case studies where you guys can just see them in action, and they will walk you through what is it that they are paying attention and trying to do and touch and see. So I would not be talking about where the anatomy and what causes what, but a lot of what you guys are going to be seeing is how, even when there is a brain injury that may be impairing or decreasing the ability of one part of the body or a certain sense to be fully active during the learning process, how can we support that and enhance the experience so the learning can really reach its maximum potential? So with that, I think I'm going to pass it on to Marty, and we will meet after the second talk for questions and continue talking about what we are seeing and what we are trying to accomplish here. Thank you, Marty.
Thanks so much, Dr. Mussolino. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks everyone for joining us. Before we talk about these 2 specific children, I want to introduce the model that we use in our work to understand the developmental learning process and how new milestones emerge through that process. So in order to introduce that model, we're going to look at this question: how do young children learn to read and write? If you're thinking in a very linear, straightforward way, you could just think that you sit there and you say, this is the alphabet, everyone. Say A. Let's now say B, right? But it actually, as a former preschool teacher, I know that the process is actually very complex and very rich. So there's a wide range of experiences that children need to have in order to learn to write. So here's a girl drawing, scribbling, and then representing an object, a pumpkin, and also a wide range of experiences that they go through to get interested in engaging with books in different contexts, being able to talk about them with their friends. Not only that, but scissors, paintbrushes, zippers, glue, all these pieces that go into helping them map how to use their hands and fingers, how to manage small objects. Of course, more markers. And not only that, but music helps children learn about rhyming, the structure of story, and even finger paint, which if you can see that, that helps the children learn to map the rich sensation of their hands and fingers. So you could easily look at all this and think, wow, this is really messy. Like there's a lot going on. And you're right, it actually is a mess in a sense because it's a network. And this is how we think of the process of developmental learning. There's a lot of variety, that the adults hold the goal of the milestone loosely. So backing away from trying to impose that end goal, giving the children time and space to explore. And also, something's blocking that. There we go. Time to play, right? So that they can manage their own interest, their own curiosity, and that the whole process, like the brain, is nonlinear. It's a network of interconnected experiences or interconnected neurons. And so now we're going to talk about these two children. I want to introduce you to David. Oops. There we go. Introduce you to David. Here he was at 5 months. And David, at 2.5 months, had a severe traumatic brain injury, which caused a stroke. And these impacted primarily the right side of his brain and left him with less movement and less sensation on the left side of himself, and also less of access to the left visual field in terms of his vision and perception of space. So we're going to look at how we apply this process with him. When he came home from rehab around 5 months, his parents were encouraged to have him practice being on his belly, and also to practice sitting up so he could learn to manage his head. But he really hated being on his belly, and he resisted it. And in sitting, his legs were stiff and his back was rounded, and his parents were concerned that he wasn't ready for those milestones, but they wanted some way to support him in the process. So I don't have video of me working with him early on to get comfortable and really interested and passionate actually about coming to his belly. This is later on when he was already super motivated to play and explore on his belly. But I'm going to show you some videos and just talk about the process and how we approach these questions. So first, I'm taking off his pants so we can feel his legs. He has to map himself in this relatively new situation of being on his belly. And so you can see I'm not trying to put him right away in a position, in a situation that I'm just going to pause 1 sec. I realize, is the video quality okay? It's okay for you?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh,
Looks
okay.
really,
Say
really
again?
okay. And the sound is also coming through, Maddie. So if you need to speak over, you might want to lower it.
Okay, because it is the sound loud. Okay, thank you.
Yes, the sound is coming out as well. Yes.
Okay, I knew it was coming through. I thought it was pretty quiet, but I'll bring it down. All right, so I'm not trying to rush and put him into a situation, a position that he's can't yet do, right? And filling in, I'm thinking of this process as him sensing, feeling himself and filling in that map, that building that network. And here he begins to, I expose his elbow so he can feel his arm on the floor, and he starts to kick his legs. And the kicking is like part of his process of mapping himself. This is his left leg, which is less mapped for him, he's less aware of it, but he's sensing it, he's feeling the weight of it, the sensation of the impact, and exploring and enjoying the process. Here, let's mute that. Oh no, actually you need sound in this one. I'll put it up. I'm playing with his sense of space. So he's coming a little bit further away from the floor here, but his visual field again is more developed, more accessible on the right. So I'm on his right side where he has access to sensing seeing the block, hearing it, and using a lot of variety to captivate his interest. And then beginning to explore again, coming more towards the midline, he touches it with his right hand and touching his left hand there with the block. So he can, and he looked at it, but then he starts to shift his weight over so he can see it on the right side. So I'm not forcing or trying to get him to do the thing he can't yet do, but actually trying to build this network or a web of experiences. Here he's resting, and because I want him to sense himself with more clarity, with more detail, resting and feeling when he wants to rest is an important part of that process, actually. So I give him the space and time to feel that. And then when I pull up his sleeve there, you can see right away comes onto his elbow and starts to lean on it, and beginning to learn or feel how he can pull, use the friction between the yoga mat and his arms and his legs to generate some action, some movement. So taking time to feel that. Here he comes up and his hands are together, so it's harder to balance with your hands together, but he started to explore coming further away. In this clip, you'll see he comes onto his hands and knees, but his hands are pretty far apart from his knees, and his hands are actually also touching each other, which makes it harder to balance. But rather than correcting him or trying to impose what I want him to feel, I'll just turn this volume down, or what I might think might be the correct way of being on hands and knees, I let him, he comes down and he's in a less demanding situation. It's much easier to learn something new when you're not struggling to manage yourself in gravity in a more challenging situation. So he's on his belly. It's a perfect time and opportunity for him to feel the shifting of the weight. So he's feeling the rolling of his chest towards his left elbow, the weight coming towards his right, towards his left and towards his right. And you can see there he starts to get interested in coming up. And again, rather than me correcting him, he brings his hands closer. And to me, like, that is the important distinction. One of the important distinctions is like supporting him to generate that novel, that change for himself. There he separated his hands and just taking the time to feel, again, a lot of variety, a lot of exploring, sensing the shifting of his weight to the left, to the right. And here he does this thing where, well, you'll see he's exploring and clarifying for himself where he wants to have his hands relative to his knees. But he starts to lift his knee, and I don't really know where he's going, but rather than correcting him, I follow him, and this is his pathway that he discovered for sitting up. And it wasn't initially how I thought he was going to learn to sit up, but that was how he did it. And the fact that he did it is really important for his being comfortable, being confident in that new situation. But again, we're constantly going forward, going back, exploring, not back, but to a less demanding situation. So here he's on his belly, he's kicking me. There's a playful interaction. You can see he's comfortable and interested. And I'm just helping him shift his weight, feeling that he has two hands, two arms, that the weight can shift, that he can feel the relationship, and again, mapping the sensation of the connection between his hands, his shoulders, his back, and playing with the weights there. He comes and you can see he's comfortable, he's interested, and he brings himself up, and right away he starts advancing, shifting his weight to advance forward towards this, and reach actually towards this toy. So one thing I think is important about the quality of the process, again, there's a lot of variety, a lot of presence to the sensation. Here he's shifting his weight a little here, a little there, mapping, feeling the dynamic situation of balance, of going off, going a little towards balance, a little off. Oops. Uh-oh. Sorry, I got off my, there we go. Okay, are you still seeing the same slideshow, right? Or did it get off for you?
Now is back.
You're good?
Yeah.
Okay. 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 My mouse did something weird. Here he's already more comfortable in sitting. He's come to sitting on his own, but he's still less mapped in terms of the left side. So I put this toy on his left side. He touched it briefly, but he didn't quite engage with it or see it. And you can see there, he puts his hand, right, just a moment before, he put his hand in my elbow, or sorry, his elbow in my hand. And I could have easily just said, like, try to take his hand and say, here's the toy, touch the toy, like, feel this. But I actually didn't. I want him to have the opportunity to feel it himself. So I inhibit that, my own urgency, right? And give him the opportunity, and then he happens upon it and discovers it. And you can see his dad, who's watching so closely the process, celebrating that discovery, right? It's like mapping for him to discover and connect that for himself is, it happened again. Sorry about that. There we go. My PowerPoint Zoom skills are being tested. All right, so anyway, I just want to say that this discovery, the integration being generated by him is an important part of the process, because it really gives him that experience of having figured it out and knows that he can do it again in the future, or that he can build that more robust network understanding of himself. Here he's come to sit in many ways. He can lean on his right hand there and on his left hand, touching the mat, and looking to his left, looking to his right, and just having a more complete map of himself, the space around him. And here I begin to make noise on the mat with my fingers. And he's interested, but he doesn't right away bring his arm across, his right arm, and then he does. So again, letting him generate that novelty, that advancement in his understanding, his skill, and filling in this map of himself and his experience of sitting, so that he can be comfortable and engage there. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mara, and she's going to talk about another child, older child, and a similar process that she did with him.
Thanks, Maddie. So I'm going to talk about Orion, who's a 6-year-old boy that I've been working on using many of the same principles that Maddie talked about, but I work with him in a totally different context, outside in parks and playgrounds, sometimes in the family's yard, sometimes in their basement, lots of different contexts. So we do things at playgrounds like make music, draw with chalk, make obstacle courses, garden, do origami, crafts with glue. So lots and lots of play in many contexts. And our goals are to support Orion's confidence, social play, and development in all areas. So sometimes it looks like getting better at climbing by climbing lots of different structures. Or it can look like the theme of my talk now is how Orion has learned to ride a bike. And this is a process that's extended really through his whole life. From when he was a toddler, he loved these cozy coupe cars. This was before I knew him. When he was about 2 years old, he had his first balance bike and he could walk it, you'll see in a minute. And then a couple different kinds of scooters, a bike with training wheels. And just in time for this talk, he has had a massive growth spurt in his skills on the bike within the last 2 weeks. So learning, this is a theme that Maddie showed, it takes time and many, many experiments, lots of variety, lots of time, not a lot of pressure. And the time and space for the child to set their own agenda and discover their possibilities. So I'm going to go more deeply into this case study about how Orion learned to ride a bike. And we'll start with how he rides this very first balance bike. And you can see he's 2 years old and he's walking it. His right side is affected. He had a stroke around the time of his birth. And he let go first with his unaffected left hand. So he has grip on both hands, but it's harder to ungrip or let go with his affected right side. So you see that very early. And then around 3 or 4, he started riding this green scooter and he was pretty comfortable on flat ground. When I started working with him, he was just turning 4. And one of the early things we did was work on learning to ride downhill. So we're on a ramp and I'm in front of him. This is not a video because I was actively helping him. And so the game at that time was he would tell me how far away I could stand and he'd crash into me and I'd catch him. So it was fun, it was playful, and he wasn't having to figure out how to stop. He was just getting comfortable with going fast. So that was an early scooter game, gaining the skill of going downhill. Later, he learned to drag his right foot to slow himself down. And then you'll see he pushes with his left foot. And then he learned to use the brake. This kind of scooter has a brake on the rear wheel. Training wheels were also part of his process, Orion's process of learning to bike. So in this case, his right foot and leg are in an ankle foot orthotic, and pedaling with training wheels frees him up so he doesn't have to worry about balance, but he can work on pedaling. And you can see that he's doing a lot of the work for pedaling with his left leg, but his right leg's staying on the pedal and following along. And he had been frustrated when other therapists had tried strapping his right foot to the pedal on a tricycle or on a training wheel bike. So it just was over the course of maybe 18 months that he got more and more comfortable. So this past fall, what I noticed when we were at a park and he brought his training wheel bike, he got very into riding it and he was taking more risks. He could fall because he was going over, something that was a little bumpy, and he'd get right up and he had a positive attitude about that experience. So he was gaining confidence and skill with the scooter and the bike with training wheels. But he was kind of stuck with those two options, and we'd frequently bring the balance bike and he'd try it very briefly and say, no, I don't want it. And he'd take 2 steps and put it down. So here he is in February, he was almost 6 years old and he had mastered the scooter. So just watch how relaxed he is. And it's like the scooter's an extension of himself. He even takes his left hand off the scooter and waves to me. So he's just completely comfortable. So this is the same kid that 2 years prior, needed me to catch him as he started going down a slope. So, but he was mastering the training wheel bike and the scooter, but he wanted to move on to the next thing. His peers were moving on, his sister, his family wanted to be able to go on family bike rides. So, they went to the bike shop thinking maybe he'd be motivated if he got a new bike. And just like when you're buying shoes for a quickly growing child, you buy the bike that's the size for them to grow into. So this is his 20-inch bike. And he was very excited to have it and to ride it, but he was also scared. So the first time that I met him, he usually came with 1 or 2 things to ride every time we met. And we'd play at the playground and play with his bike or his scooter. So this day, these were the 2 options that fit in the car, the new bike and the balance bike that he so far had resisted riding. And I pushed him slow down a grassy slope on the big new bike, and he fell. And he didn't get injured, but he was upset. So we went and played on the playground, and I made a deal with him. I said, okay, we're going to play for a little while here on the playground, but then when we go back, you need to ride one of the bikes. Which one do you want? And he chose the safer, smaller one, which you can see the seat is at its maximum height. He was sort of saying, oh, it's too small for me, but he still didn't know how to ride it. So that day he started riding it. And that was about 2 weeks ago. So I forgot to mention earlier in my talk, when I first started working with him when he was around 4, he was stuttering quite significantly. And that came way down with play and our work together. But I just want you to appreciate his language development along with the rest of his development and his ability to speak to his own embodied experience. So this is something that obviously an infant who's learning to move can't have language for, but a 6-year-old can. So this was on April 21st, really his first day figuring out that he could glide on this bike. So listen to him. So what happened is I noticed that he was starting to almost run with his feet with the balance bike. And instead of saying, be careful, don't fall, I didn't warn him. I just asked a question. And the question was, hey, Orion, you're going fast. How are you going to slow down? And he paused and felt it. And then he came up with this himself. So after that day, he started asking to go bike every single day on the balance bike. He asked his mom. And I don't see him every day. I see him once a week, sometimes twice a week. So the next time I saw him, he had progressed quite far. And here he is exploring at a different park the day after a big rain, this mud puddle. So as a mud puddle, there's some motor planning about what to do. And he figures out a strategy where his feet stay dry and he's using the bike as a tool to get across. And then he thinks about doing it again. And he spends some time going this way and that way, sort of like the weight shifting Maddie was showing with the younger child. And he says no, and he goes around the side. And then he dings his own bell. So I'm not celebrating for him. I'm letting him have his experience and really own it. The next thing that happened really surprised me. So we were at that same park and he started to look at a path that went up a hill. And he spent quite a while looking up there. And then he said to me, if you go up there and you turn again, you'll get to Crystal Lake. That's where he had gone with his dad and his sister last summer to go swimming. And sure enough, I look on my phone at the mapping app, and he's accurate in his sense of direction. And Crystal Lake is about half a mile away. And so when he asked, can we go there? I said, yes. And here he is on the final downhill coasting toward Crystal Lake, which is off behind this fence. And he made it the whole way except one steep uphill where he asked to walk and I pushed his bike. So he went from learning how to ride and then riding to explore his world within a matter of 5 days. And some of these videos are from when he was with his family. So here he is at a different park. And again, he's very embodied. So now he's talking about how he's gonna pick his feet up. So you'll see his gestures with his left hand and his feet and his language.
You'll see, as soon as I get low enough,
Sorry.
fast, he's fast.
He is fast.
As soon as I get low enough, I'll pick my feet up. I'm fast enough.
So he has a motor plan in his body. He can put language to it and then he can do it, which is quite remarkable. Oops. Okay, so up to now, he's, within the course of a week, he's really gotten comfortable on this Blue Balance bike. And so you might say that's like the next stage. And then the next milestone can emerge quite suddenly. So when the family got the larger bike that I showed you, his mom actually asked whether they should keep these two bikes. This one, the balance bike's a 14-inch bike. This red one's a 16-inch bike. And I said, yes, keep them. I think they'll help him learn. So glad that we did that. Okay, so on Saturday, just this past Saturday, Maddie and I were actively preparing these presentations and I got a text from Orion's mom saying we have liftoff. So watch this. He's gonna place his affected right foot on the pedal. That's the foot that wears the AFO. And he pushes 15 times with his left foot before he starts pedaling. And that's the opposite foot from which he pushes on the scooter, but it's a very similar motion to that, which you learn when you're on a scooter. Placing the right foot. And there he goes. So this was, I think there were earlier rides that day where his father had pushed him really fast on a balance bike and then really fast on the bike with pedals, the two-wheeler without training wheels. But this is within, half an hour of starting to ride on the two-wheeler. The very next day, he rode 4 miles.
This is so awesome.
While his father was jogging behind him. This is so awesome. Just the joy of that is palpable, to go from not being able to do something to having the freedom to ride where other people are out enjoying the beautiful day. And then I had the pleasure and privilege of seeing him just this past Monday. And this is back at the same park where he was lifting his 2 feet up. And you can see just the joy that he has from being able to bike with his friends, something that he was feeling left out of even 2 weeks prior. And it takes many fewer pushes for him to get going. He was going down a little slope, but he goes down, he goes up. You'll see his cousin come up behind him, and there's a tunnel that they're going through. So it's just like, I'm so proud of him, and he's so proud of himself and excited. So Maddie and I work together and with Patty to summarize some of the principles that really span the 2 case studies that we've shared. And we want to leave this up for a little bit and offer Patty the chance just to integrate what we've shared from a neurodevelopmental perspective. And then we'll shift into a mode of taking questions. We have somebody who's going to ask for some support, but I'll hand it to Patty right now.
Thank you so much, Maddie and Mara. I happen to know some of these kids, not all of them, but seeing the kids just conquering their own world and expanding the experience. And I think about movement, and these are therapies that use movement to provide the opportunity to have an experience. And the one part that I wanted to help out here is, how do we think about neurological development after there has been brain injury, or recovery after brain injury? And I could have put a PowerPoint and started talking about, and we've done it before in another workshop, and we'll come to that for those that are interested in imaging and anatomy and kind of like feeding yourself with more information that helps you access what could be helpful to your child. But instead of putting a PowerPoint, I really wanted to not take away from what you just saw, which is this amazing journey that each of these 2 kids are doing themselves. And the principles that are put here in a PowerPoint is, there is no learning happening for any neurotypical or non-neurotypical brain if there is no experience. And experience means not experience of what, I have a ton of experience. It means experience of the ability to access something new. And this is where variety is coming in. And why do we need variety? We know that we're born, our neurons are in a massive level of activity, but they have to prune a lot of connections that are not going to be as successful, useful to get them to do something with mastery. And I'm talking about like moving my thumb, chewing, swallowing, recognizing the world around me with my vision, with my hearing. All of this will require this mapping that Maddie and Mara are talking about. And a baby, as you see them from the moment that they are coming out, they are constantly in sensing mode. They're sensing the touch, the temperature, their parents, the caregivers. And if you look at them, even the smallest, youngest, even premature babies, they are constantly doing teeny tiny movements, okay? Even when they are asleep. And that's part of the design of how the brain increases the ability to provide opportunity to map that, for example, fingers moving or toes moving. The other thing that I wanted to point from these videos that you just saw, you've seen them moving. They are not moving one arm, one finger, one toe, or doing an exercise. There is no exercise. They are moving everything. And mostly when the younger babies, they really require this being free to move. So you saw also the comfortable clothing. You saw that there are no socks and mips. I don't care if they are scratching their face because they have big nails or whatever. They really need to access that teeny tiny subtlety in their movements, in their toes, to really provide that sensory map to know when they're moving, what is really happening to that muscle, that joint, that tendon, and what needs to be adjusted if I want to get to the apple, if I want to put my foot on the pedal, if I want to slow down. What do I need to do with my trunk? And that necessity of movement, that from the very, very early on, is part of how the brain will utilize that experience to continue to map. So what can we do from any therapies? If you're OT, speech, swallow, like whatever is, or a parent just changing the diaper, you can, first of all, look. When you look, you will see the richness of what's going on. if you are, watch out with the diaper and stuff like that, the kid doesn't get all messy and stuff. Sometimes you cannot look directly, but when you have the opportunity, take every single one and see what are they working on. You saw and you heard from Marty saying these words. I'm trying to see what is he doing, what is he mapping. And in the watching, there is no dialogue necessarily. So it might be that you are engaging with words, but it might not be necessary. And you saw a lot of Marty not talking to the baby, Mara not talking to this kid, giving them directions like put your hand here, do that, avoid that, slow down. So the least that we can interfere with what they are doing until we understand a little bit where they're working on. And not editorializing, oh, great, or that feels great, or this is color, blah, 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 in labeling everything they're doing. We really don't know what is the experience that they're having. So if you see, there's a lot of observation. And that means that we have to give that space. And this is very, very true, very highly known in molecular biology of the hippocampus. You need time to learn, and you need to slow down. And if I am going fast, or I'm moving and I just put the toy here and another toy there and another toy there, then I am distracting them from their own experience. And that is going too fast maybe for what they were interested in developing. So I'm just going with the material that we've been given, but I hope that you guys can follow me before we open for the Q&A. This part of non-linear, I think is absolutely necessary to have a sense in ourselves. And this is what we see the most commonly in clinic, is that the parents are following the milestones. So it should be on their belly. They should have to sit. They should be doing this. It should. The should distracts you from where they're working on and where they're trying to go. And that might have a completely like this path, which is pretty much how we all learn anything. You don't learn to cook by just like throwing everything together. You need all the pieces of the recipe. You need to practice a couple of times. For anything that we're learning, we need to have the possibility of also doing something not straightforward, slower than what we wanted, and maybe getting even injured. And I'm talking about I don't want to call it failure, because failure has this connotation that, oh, you did a trial, so they did experiment and it didn't go well. There is no experiment that doesn't go well, because the purpose of the experiment is the experiment in itself, the experience in itself. And without experiments, there is no learning. So if you want to prevent them from developing something, the one thing that you have to do is to always keep them from doing it. And that's a way, if you want the opposite extreme, of how we can get on the way and be interference instead of being a supporting experience. And we're doing this with very specific purpose. A lot of the parents that I work with have been put into this constant situation of one specialist says something needs to happen this way, blah, blah, blah. The other specialist says, no, that has to happen this other way. And you are caught in the middle and trying to see, how am I supposed to do this? And am I doing something wrong? Am I going to hurt my child? So we want you to step back, look at them, and instead of going with the prescription, try to see what applies of it. And if you didn't understand why they're asking you to do an exercise or a certain intervention, what you first have to do is ask that person why, how, because of what am I supposed to be doing? What are we gonna gain with that? And in those answers, you will see where they're coming from. And you might decide to drop or take or apply whatever is applicable to your child and the time in development that your child is in. So I know this sounds like very complicated, but you just saw that there are very few things that we all can do, and we all can do with even our other relationships, not just our children, which is to connect, to watch, to observe what they're working. And how can we be part of that journey? And if in the cases of this movement to learn, which babies require early and later on as also adults, we all require a multisensory experience as much as we can provide that, not overloaded, not too fast, and always with the eye on what is the kid doing. And I don't know if you guys also notice the touch, okay? So you've seen when Mara is making a video, she's not touching, but there is a lot of touch that happens when she's not making the video. And you saw Marty, and that's why we picked these two examples, where there is a touch, but it's a touch that is gentle, it's not with an agenda, it's not forcing a position, it's not trying to stretch anything. And it's also a touch that is giving little subtlety, like moving, pressure, and a lot of it happens in the hips and the trunk. And that's something that releases spasticity. That's also been demonstrated. If you can support the trunk and that fight against gravity that they have to be doing early on, you can do a lot more of the other parts to access the experience, to reach the toy, to get on the bike and go with your friends, which is at the end of the day, the motivation, because I don't see it as a goal. I don't even know what the goal is. Probably, I don't know, he may end up in a Paralympia or an Olympic. Like, who knows what the goal is? The point is that he had a motivation, something that he needed to access. And what we concentrated on with that in mind is what needed to happen that could provide experiments for that kind of experience. Good, some days slower, some days faster, cleaner, dirtier, safer, less safer, and allow that process to evolve. And it's really one thing, if we can leave you with, is ask questions, even to your child. Don't assume you know what they even are asking a question. And asking questions is, how was that? Or what are you trying to do? Or how do you do that? Is much more helpful than to give instructions, because they have a different processing and a different way of understanding. So I don't know, Mara and Marty, if I am leaving any of the big brushes conceptualized here. And we will be doing this from the anatomy side and showing you how, if you get gravity to play with you, you can play a lot more. And that's because after brain injury, in particular with a stroke, we do have a lot of extra reflexes that may be getting on the way that we can minimize to allow for more experience, for more movement, for more sensory. And again, what I say in every single workshop, talk to your neurologist and your practitioners, your therapist, about the injury in your child. Try to understand what is it that will have a specific challenge. And you saw that these two guys are trying to not only just move, they're trying to map a part of the world where they do have a decreased like sensory input, for example. And it is through movement that they access that part of the world. But there is also, as we've seen in other webinars, many other sensory experiences that they are also doing at the same time. But going back to, we learn to read and write from many, many, many different experiences. So with that, I think we're gonna pass it on to Catherine Marshall, who is also one of the mothers in our parent advisory board. For those of you that don't know how this gets to be formed, it's just parents and therapists, and Dr. Wisher, which is a pediatric physiatrist, is also in the webinar if you guys have questions for. Come together many years ago to brainstorm on how can we really help the families thrive in the journey after brain injury. And in doing this, we are trying to find resources to support both the educational mission and the research mission to see what therapies can really improve and help more. And in doing so, a lot of it is being done with the support of the families themselves.